Okay, welcome to of KUDEN Radio. So years ago, um, during I don't know, I would say earlier days of my ninjutsu training, um, maybe it was probably in the earliest days. Anyway, I was introduced to an idea about invisibility, stealth. That Henso Jutsu stuff nobody wants to practice. Anyway, um, what the scrolls state is that the epitome of this is to become invisible in the eyes of the enemy, right? Now, most people hear something like that and immediately imagine, I don't know, hiding in the darkness, disappearing behind cover, or I don't know, somehow otherwise preventing the enemy's eyes from seeing them, right? Some kind of magic trick or something like that, right? But there's another way to become quote unquote invisible, right? You can remain completely visible while giving the observer's mind no reason to continue paying attention to you, right? So, an example of this um, is, well, when I'm moving through, public places, crowded places specifically, right? I'll sometimes notice someone looking at me with that expression, right? That says, I don't know, anything from do I know him to who is this guy? Whatever, right? They're trying to they're trying to answer the question, right? What's different? Why, right? Um, I mean, there's a bunch of other people around too, right? So if I don't recognize the person, one of the first things I do is I check my gait. I check how I'm walking, right? Specifically, okay? Um, because the relationship between the way I'm walking and the amount of natural looking arm swing that I'm displaying, right, that people might pick up on, right, is or could be in that moment different from what they're used to seeing. Okay. And here's the thing, it's one of those litmus tests in the art, right? Good taijutsu tends to reduce unnecessary movement in the body, right? And one of those things is that the arms don't have to swing merely because the legs are moving. Okay. The thing that we take for granted, so much so we probably don't even notice it, right? So the arms actually remain more still. They're not frozen, they're not stiff or anything like that. There's just way, way, way less arm swing, right? They're more connected, they're more available, they're more relaxed. They don't swing as a counterbalance to this normal bipedal swaying, bobbing, bouncing kind of thing that people do, right? That anthropologists have decided human beings swing their arms because that's true, because of the way. But anyway, so I learned to notice that in teachers and seniors and whatnot, right? But that same thing can also make the movement, right, of our bodies look different from what the average person expects to see, right? Now, the observer, they're probably not thinking his gait to arm swing relationship is unusual. Right? He's probably not thinking that, right? He might just simply feel, right, that something doesn't fit, something's off, right? Something is deserving of attention, right? Because it doesn't fit the normal pattern. And because his mind hasn't resolved that discrepancy, his attention stays on me, right? So instead of wondering, this guy up to, is he suspicious, whatever, right? I learned this a long time ago, okay? And so first thing I do is I check that. And as soon as I realize that my arms aren't swinging, I deliberately add an ordinary arm swing back into my walk. And then I check his gaze again. And most of the time, his attention shifts away, goes right back to whatever he was doing beforehand, right? Before I created that unanswered question, his perception just kind of pops out, right? And while we could talk about that in and of itself quite a bit, we'll just leave it with when I altered my arm swing, right? I end up moving from the category in his mind, right? From the category of something unusual that may require an explanation, right? A problem that needs to be solved, right? Back into the category of just another person walking through the crowd, right? So I didn't disappear from his sight, right? But I did disappear from his attention. Okay. So that's one way of understanding, right? That phrase, becoming invisible in the eyes of the enemy, right? But I think it also raises a much bigger question. That question is, what attracts your attention? And what do your existing expectations, unconscious, subconscious expectations, prevent you from seeing? Okay? Because martial arts students do the same thing. We do. We notice the punch coming. We notice the grab that's on us. We notice the lock. We notice the throw, right? We notice the dramatic henko variation, right? We notice the moment the uke hits the ground. We pay attention to whatever looks most like the technique we came to learn, right? But what if the real lesson is contained or inside, right? Something we've already, in our own minds, classified or categorized or whatever as unimportant. It's normal. It's average. It's so normal and everyday, we don't even pay attention to it. Okay. What if it's wrapped around, let's say, the direction from which danger will come at us, right? What if it's in the moment our counterattack missed, right? What if it's in the moment or the instant when, excuse me, when something happened that put the other person, right, the attacker, whatever, right, next to us, right, or behind us, before we even realized that original alignment, relationship, whatever, had changed, right? What if it's in the condition that existed before the first obvious attack was ever thrown? Right? What if? Right? Because the beginner tends to look where he has been shown or told or whatever that the technique is happening, right? They tend to focus on the move or the thing or the cool takedown or whatever, right? The intermediate or the developing student is the one who begins noticing, right, things that kind of surround the technique or its different parts, right? Why it works, what makes it work, those kind of things, right? But the master, senior student, whatever you want to call them, right, learns to see the conditions, the relationships, right, and changes that determine whether there's a technique at all. Okay. And perhaps the deepest lessons aren't invisible because they've been intentionally hidden. Perhaps they remain invisible because the way we've learned to look, the way we've learned to see, observe, recognize, whatever, right, tells us that they're not important enough to notice. What if? Okay. So I'm going to talk about that and a few other things that are related to it as soon as we officially get started. So I'll see you when I get back.
So, the big question is this. How are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio, real training for real people in a real world.
And again, after this is episode 316. So after all this time, that's still my story. Anyway, so welcome back to another episode of KUDEN Radio, the warrior's path to greater understanding, all that wonderful stuff, right? I'm your host, Dai-Shihan Jeffrey Miller. If you're not one of our regulars, that might be helpful. I have Sensei Alexander in the background kind of managing things for me because that's what he does. Anyway, during this episode, we are continuing the line of exploration that we've been following over the past several weeks. And that's been pretty much on the missing pieces in our training that may be preventing technique, right, from actually becoming usable, adaptable, from becoming what we might call street ready, right? Real world capability. Okay. And I know we all like to believe that that's what we're doing. Of course. Why would we not? Well, hopefully we've been answering some of those questions. Okay. And to borrow a marketing phrase that gets you to buy things, right? I don't like to use these. I'm only referencing it, right? It's not your fault. Okay. Because a lot of this stuff is so subconscious, unconscious. It's so normal in everyday life, right? That we end up almost inheriting it. Okay. So there's the good news for you. Right? The bad news is some of it might be our fault. It's just the way it is, right? But if we don't know that it's going on, if we don't know that it's happening, if we don't know how our own mind works, then it's going to control what we do. And that's one of the base questions in our Mikyo, right? Esoteric enlightenment studies, right? Are you in control of your mind, or is it in control of you? And I know we all like to believe that we're in control of our mind, but what's making us talk? What's making us think, right? So anyway, so up to this point, we've talked about the danger of copying the master teacher's external appearance, right? The demonstration, right? The techniques and whatnot that it looks like they're teaching us, right? Without understanding what his movement is actually doing to the other person. Well, it's wiping the floor with his ass, Sensei. Yeah, no. Okay. How is it affecting him? When we say that it's taking his balance, how? Well, you're pushing and pulling. Okay. Yeah. Vague thinking produces vague answers, produces vague living, produces, right? One of the first aspects or first areas of study on the mandala is precision. Okay. Better clarity. Right. So anyway, what else? We've talked about drills and developmental practices, right? That, in my opinion, in my teacher's opinion, right, That's his opinion, right? Even though they didn't demonstrate these things. I mean, anybody live in Japan for decades straight, not just visit back and forth, or not just learn from somebody who went back and forth, not just, you see where I'm going with this, right? So anyway, right, we've talked about these things that must exist between learning a technique and being able to use that skill spontaneously when needed, where it matters most, and when it matters most, right? What else have we done? We have talked about en-undo, right? This circular repetition exercise that we have in our curriculum. We introduced it in Module 2, but what we really focused on was the artificial stops that students insert between movements. Okay, evade, stop, block, stop, strike, stop, that kind of thing. And I'm not talking about the obvious robotic stuff that many of us might have done in our hard karate days, right? I'm talking about the ones that some of us are still doing, and we think that we're flowing and moving smoothly, right? So we looked at what en-undo really was and what is really teaching, because people tend to turn it into a technique and try to memorize it just like everything else, or practice it enough so that they can actually develop the skills that it's supposed to be developing in them, right? And so they have these stops, pauses in movement, right? As though the attacker, right, the environment, the rest of the world is just going to agree to freeze while we complete the next move or the next item or the next piece in the sequence, right, that the kata says we're supposed to do, right? Anyway, so if you missed any of those, go back, take a look at, or take a listen to episodes 313, 314, 315, the Whiteboard Wednesdays that kind of fit in there. For those of you listening to this in the future, I'm referencing things that have occurred in the June, July of 2026 timeframe. Okay, so during this episode, we move into another piece, right? Things are going to get way more proactive after this. So this is a transition between hidden things and disciplined practice, okay, which will be between this and the next at least 2 episodes. Okay, so we're going to look at the direction from which we observe a problem, an attack, right, determines what we're actually capable of seeing and how that's going to affect our training, right? How it's probably already affecting our training, right? And so our physical reference point, a lot of you that are in the art will know this word. I'll kind of translate things as we go along. But what we're going to be using is happō, right? Happō, which is conventionally translated as 8 directions, okay? And please notice I didn't drop the word kihon in front of it, okay? But 8 directions, 8 ways. It's a contraction of hachi-ho, right? 8 ways, 8 methods. But happō, right? 8 directions. That's what we're going to use for this one. There's more to it, but that's sufficient, right? It's our reference point, okay? So many martial artists, particularly those training in ninjutsu, ninpo, bujinkan, budo, taijutsu, right? They're introduced to happō as 8 directions in which we can move or evade, right? So I'm standing in the hub, okay, of it, right, the center, and then the attack is coming in, right? And then I can move directly into them. I can move forward and to my left, forward and to my right, rear, right, left and right, right? I could, right? The idea is eventually we're going to get to happō movement, which is infinite. I should be able to move 360 degrees around me, given space, environment, those kind of things, right? So this is where we start, right? Again, forward, backward, left, right, four diagonal directions between them, all that stuff, right? And so that's useful and necessary as a beginning, right? As a place to start, right? So we get a handle on this asymmetrical combat, right? And we're not getting stuck or playing the same game of nose to nose, toe to toe, that kind of thing, right? And I'm not knocking those things; they work for people, right? But remember, we have to come at this from the perspective of preparing to handle somebody who is bigger, stronger, taller, wider, broader, heavier, faster, healthier, whatever. Okay. And we're at a severe disadvantage. It's either because of that size or speed or whatever, or it's because of illness, injury, age, whatever. Okay. So that's how people normally get started. Okay. But for this episode, I want to reverse those arrows, right? So if you can imagine, draw a circle in the middle of a piece of paper and then, just make 8 arrows come out from it, right? Make one go forward, one back, one to the right, one to the left, and then do the diagonals and stuff like that. Put little arrowheads on them, right? So when the attacker comes in, I can follow any one of those arrowheads, right? But what we're going to do tonight is we're going to flip the arrows. So now all the arrows point in. Okay? Because it depends on how you train and how this is worked into your curriculum. Before, after, usually doesn't happen at the same time, right? But for us, for our students, it tends to come after, right? 8 directions in which I can move, right? It then becomes 8 directions from which the attack can come at me from. Okay. And so we're going to highlight a little problem here, but I'll start it. Because the beginner and the beginner mind and the rest of us can make the assumption that we're going to be facing the arrow that the attack is coming in on. Okay. I'll get back to that. But for now, right, the beginner asks what, right? Where can I go, right? Where do I move? How do I avoid? That kind of thing, right? But even before that question, right, there might be another one, right? And that is, right, where's the danger actually coming from? But they're still normally thinking that it's in front of them. So the question is more about, is it a straight punch? Is it a hook punch? Is it an uppercut? Is it a roundhouse kick or whatever, right? And then there's another one, right? If it began in one direction, will it stay there? And actually, beginners, it's the intuitive beginner that asks those, not every beginner. Okay, so tonight during this episode, it's not going to be we're not going to be looking at a list of 8 attacks and 8 defenses. Okay, and it's not going to be something I'm going to cover in the next for next week. Next week's training, or this Shiho Dori lesson, okay, which are these 4 primary lines for catching or moving someone easily. It's a different configuration, right? And for those of you who have been around for a long time, when I say Shiho Dori, I'm not referencing the kata in the is it Kukishinden? It's not in that one. Okay. So These are basics. These are fundamentals, right? Lines of movement, that kind of thing, right? So we'll get to the 4 basic naname lines, explore how the same technique can be directed toward different tactical results, all that kind of stuff, right? I take the same hand for an omote gyaku that I would normally just go right or left and rear to take him down. Right? His right hand, take him left and rear. Basic model that we learn, right? And that's going to put him on his butt, right? I also want to be able to go to my right rear and have him land on his butt. I also want to be able to go to my left front, have him land on his butt. And I want to be able to go to my right front and have him land on his butt with the same hand doing omote gyaku, right? Again, that's for next week. This episode is about perception, okay? It is about the direction in which we have been trained to look. How to look, how to see, what to pay attention to, what's important, what's not, okay? It's also about the roles that we assign to people before we understand the whole relationship. Now, primarily, we're gonna stay obviously within the martial arts realm, but this can trip us up as well. Okay, it's about the stories that we build from incomplete information, and then our mind, ego, whatever, convinces us that we're dealing with reality. Okay? Look, if you've shown up and you're training in ninjutsu, ninpo, bujinkan, whether you know it or not, this is what you signed up for. And I know what everybody else is, I mean, not everybody else. I know what the greater majority is doing because we're decades away from when this art came into this country. And at this point, and I've talked to several Dai-Shihan that I would trust my life to. We all say the same thing. It went from being what it was supposed to be to, again, by and large, for most people, just being another martial arts option among martial arts options. And that's sad. But I digress. So what else? Oh, yeah. And it's about the way a dominant model can become so familiar, right? A dominant way of seeing things, perception, perspective, and whatnot, can become so familiar, right? So commonplace, so everyday, right? That we actually stop recognizing it as a model at all. And we begin relating to it, seeing it, experiencing it as reality itself. So that sounds a bit confusing or whatever. Not to worry, right? We're going to dive all into all this stuff, right? Because for a lot of folks, they get that a lot of these things are going on. They get that ego and our programming and whatnot gets us to see certain things or whatever. But we can only see what we can see. We can only see what's been pointed out. We can only see what we've tuned ourselves to. But there's a lot of folks that this whole area of study, this whole reality that, you know, well, let's just start with the brain and the mind are not the same thing. Okay. That they're going to need a more clarification. Okay. So that being said, the central question for this episode is this: what might be present? What might be what might be going on in your training, in your understanding of violence, or your interpretation of events and how things will transpire and play out and whatnot, right? What might be there, but effectively invisible because your existing model or perception or whatever, right, has taught you to not look in that direction. Okay. All right. Before we go any further, if you're watching or you're listening live, right, put something in the comments for me, right? When you hear the phrase an attacker is approaching, where do you picture him? Now, don't do the mental gymnastics. The first thing that comes to your mind, where is he? Right? Do you automatically place him in front of you? Are his hands already raised? And if they are, where are they? Okay? Open hands, balled fists, whatever. Okay? Do both of you know that the fight has already begun? Okay? Do you imagine one attacker, one defender, and an open area in which both of you are pretty much free to move around? What popped into your head? What was the first thing that you visualized? Okay? There's absolutely no need to manufacture a sophisticated answer or to start thinking, oh, this is a trick question. Okay? Because he might be over here. And no. Where'd your mind go first? Because under pressure, that's where your mind's going to go. It's the way we're wired. Okay? Yeah, I don't need you to manufacture something that's a product of mental gymnastics, right? To answer, I want you to notice the first picture your mind produces, because that picture may uncover, reveal, whatever word you want to use, right? The direction in which your attention has already been positioned. So when we use terms like Zanshin or awareness or terms like pay attention or whatever, right? What's the likelihood that that's where we are, right? If I'm facing it head on, then that's what I'm paying attention to. All right. Anyway, James, before I dive into this, into the deep end, who's on? Questions, comments, anything? Who's on?
Looks like Alan, Trinity, Kyle, Maury,
Trinity. Are you in class tonight? Sorry.
Carrie,
Maury. Carrie. That time you get his nary butt back on the show.
Misty, Matthew, and then Matthew said I didn't see anyone, or I saw an empty space. Alan said,
okay. So your attacker's in the dark.
And Alan said in front, hands up, or holding a weapon.
Knowing you, it was a big, heavy crayon. It's a Marine joke. Anyway, so, all right, cool. James, where was yours?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind would be in front. Not necessarily hands up. Hands are like down yet. It was more just the body language.
That intimidation body language thing. See, you're farther upstream, right? Okay? You're already paying attention to things before the hands are already up and all that. Now, I can already hear it. People are going, wow, me too, because I'm paying attention. I know. And if that's true, great. Okay. Then you're 15 steps ahead of the average martial artist or self-defense practitioner. Okay. All right. So
Sure.
we have to be careful how unique we think we are, right? Because everybody thinks they're unique. What's up?
Trinity just said I saw a lone figure walking toward me from down the street.
See how it's different, maybe, between men and women? Anyway, of course, Trinity has some experience, so it could be different. All right, so let's jump into things. Bring my notes back up here. All right, so let's begin with the conventional introduction to happō, these 8 directions. Right. So again, if I'm standing in the center, okay, of this imaginary mandala, whatever, right, I can move forward, I can move backwards, left, right, I can move along the 4 diagonals, right? So if we're doing this as an exercise, like let's say it's an attack evasion or just an attack avoidance kind of thing, right? The exercise typically begins expanding the student's available movement vocabulary. Okay, what that means is they probably came in the dojo thinking about, like, if this guy does this thing to me, how do I get him off of me, or how do I block this, or how do I counterattack him, how do I fight, whatever, right? It's this back and forth kind of thing right here, right? It's this chikara kurabe, right? Contest, right? How do I beat that, right? So the first thing we do, at least in this art, right, and other arts do it to varying extents, right, is we increase what I'm going to call their movement vocabulary, right? So instead of receiving every attack by stepping straight back or planting a foot, blocking or whatever, right, the student begins learning to move offline, right? Get out of the way, right? Or as some of my students say, get out the way, whatever. Use your vocabulary, right? So instead of retreating away, right, or covering in place, right, as the only safe direction, where I might be convinced that I've got to be faster or trickier or stronger or whatever, right? The new student learns very quickly that moving forward along an angle, right, may produce greater safety than trying to outrun the weapon, right, or keep backpedaling and stuff, right? Instead of thinking in terms of only front and back, the student develops a more complete relationship, right, with the space surrounding the body, right? And all of that is valuable. We've all learned from that, right? But now reverse the arrows, okay? Because a lesson that my new intermediate students get is, what if the lines aren't showing where I can go? What if they're showing where he's coming from, right? Now, we have these arrows, but what a lot of students initially assume is that, okay, so he's coming from that way, so I'm going to face that way. Oh, he's coming from over here, so I'm going to turn and face that way. Okay, well, that would be ideal. That'd be awesome, right? If you can do that, yeah, okay. But we're always coming at things from a devil's advocate kind of perspective, which is, what if you can't? What if you don't have time? What if your perception picks up the incoming attack and it's about to land, right? If you turn, great. You didn't get punched in the side of the head. You get punched in the eye joint. Awesome. Good job. Okay. No, I'm just being an ass because that's what I am. But the whole idea is, where's it coming from? Now, first part of a student's training for a long time is actually, it's coming in within the peripheral vision, okay, which is going to change as we look from one side to another and around, okay, which upper level students are working against multiple attackers need to pay attention to that. Because if there's a sudden flurry of movement over here or an attack that starts and these guys are fanned out and I do this, guess who has a free ride for a second? Or for as long as it takes for me to get back and look in his direction. So there's a reason there's certain footwork, tactical movement patterns and whatnot that keep people inside a certain space so that I don't have to alter my peripheral vision. I can actually use my peripheral, my eyeballs, pointing in the same direction. It's the difference between using the sense organ, which is always on, and controlling the sight consciousness as to what we're paying attention to. That's for another class. Right? So, again, right, where'd the attack come from? Okay. Because my assailant may approach from my front, right? But he could come in from either side. He could approach along a diagonal. He could come up from behind me, right? He may pass me and then turn. Does this sound familiar to anybody who's been around for a while? Right? We have techniques against all of these things. And then some. Okay? Come up behind me and grab me by my collar and yank, right? Bear hug, half or full Nelson, all kinds of shit, right? There's even advanced stuff up in the post Fifth Dan area, if people know how to read the scrolls, where Fifth Dan, there's that you're in a stationary position, sword cut. So great. Okay. So I'm able to detect danger and move away from that quickly. Great. Okay. People tend to stop there because they got the belt they were after. And then based on the old ranking system, things were either subjective or they felt subjective. Since there were no standards, people really didn't know why they got the promotion. Some got a promotion because they had a good heart. Whatever. I'm not here to discuss those things. But if you know what to look for in the scrolls, then you suddenly see that, oh, look at this. Okay. So now, like, there are attacks, right? Shinden Fudo to you, Koto to you, whatnot, right? Where he's either attacking with a sword from behind and you're going to drop back at left or back right, right? And then he's now diagonally in front and you're going to control from there. Oh, by the way, they have to be done from Fudoza. Okay. That's a happy little place. Or he's stabbing with a tanto, short sword, whatever, into your spine, and then you're supposed to vary off of that, right? Because if he attacks center line, it doesn't really matter which way you move. But if he's trying to stab me in my right kidney on this side, and I shift to my right, well, then my spine or my left kidney got taken out. Same thing, left, if I step left, right? So now I have to fine tune that ability, that this gateway benchmark level was supposed to open up. I've got to hone that because I now need to be able to detect danger coming at me from behind my peripheral vision. Okay? Wouldn't it be nice if everybody made noise? They weren't trying to sneak up on us and whatever. Okay? Anyway, so again, he might do all these things, right? We have an Ikichi guy kind of thing. And I know people learn the techniques because, like, we're doing it. We walk by, snag him, take him down, right? But the Uda of the technique is, what if he doesn't? Okay. What else, right? The bad guy could start inside conversational distance because he could have worked himself to that point, right? Hey, man, you got the time, right? Well, now we don't look at watches or Fitbits anymore, right? No. Okay. Whatever, right? Again, he might already start at that distance where the very idea of quote unquote approaching no longer, that's not even an issue, right? He may be positioned in one direction while an accomplice is in the opposite direction, right? Or they're in my field of view, right? Catching my attention. All you have to do is, look up attacks, watch some CCTV footage, whatever, and you get the gist, right? He could start in front and he could try to move me toward a secondary location right behind me. Okay, he could be moving and I'm backing up, thinking I'm controlling and paying attention to him, and next thing you know, falling down a flight of steps or getting trapped in a corner or whatever. Okay, he could attack the person beside me rather than attacking me directly. Okay, what else? He can use an obstacle, doorway, vehicle, wall, table, child, companion, whatever, right? To crowd, or even a crowd itself, right? To limit which directions remain available to me for escape, for space, for movement, whatever. Okay. So where we start with these things for the beginner, because we need to expand their vocabulary. For an advanced student, I've come to see it as almost backwards. We need that. But when we're in an actual situation, before happō tells us where we can go, right? What areas around? Like I can move in 8 directions. Okay. Before it can tell us that, it tells us that the problem is not. It's like the bad guy's not required to show up where we habitually look. And if all or most of our training is that Jackwagon is in front of us, throwing the attack from there, then that's what we're training. That's where we're training to look. I've already mentioned several situations where, well, if he shows up over here, I'm going to look. Yeah, but I know, but what if he's the accomplice and not the guy that's actually going to put you in a chokehold from behind? What if? Okay. So, but that's the thing, right? That sounds obvious when I say it out loud. Duh, sensei. Some people are probably even disconnected. This guy's like, I already know this shit. Okay. But a good chunk of martial arts training teaches the exact opposite. He's always going to be in front, right? The attacker stands in front of us. He throws the either agreed upon attack or the ones that we think bad guys throw, right? True story. I was visiting a martial arts school one time. They were teaching a different style, but it didn't matter. They were local, and I thought I'd stop in. And the teacher was about to demonstrate a technique for students to learn. And what he said was, we're going to defend against somebody who doesn't really know how to punch. And I thought, like, flailer, slapping, trying to like show or whatever, right? But has never really hit anything, and so there's a good chance that he might break his own wrist or hand or whatever, right? No, what he meant was our style is the right way to punch. And what he proceeded to demonstrate was a defense against a right cross. The punch you're most likely to have to defend against out on the street because the bad guys didn't get the memo that they're supposed to be throwing ski. That one. Because when he demonstrated, it was like, no, those people know how to punch. They don't punch like you. And they have different openings and holes that can be exploited. But you don't want to be hit by that. Right? But his words, we're going to defend against someone who doesn't know how to punch. And I politely sat and smiled through the rest of class, smile and wave, boys, that kind of thing. And went back to my life. But again, you know, the way most of us train, right? The way the kata are laid out. And I get it. They absolutely are. Which is why if we don't see them as a starting point, we're going to have a bigger problem. Because that's just going to reinforce what subconsciously, unconsciously, we already know. We know, quote unquote, right? So again, he stands in front of us, throws the expected attack, the agreed upon attack, the assumed attack, whatever, right? We perform the prescribed response. He does X, we do Y, Z, whatever, right? And I'm talking about training. I'm not talking about on the street, right? He receives the technique. We reset to the starting positions, and we rinse and repeat. I don't know about rinsing, but you get the idea, right? And so here's the thing, right? The exercise, the kata, right? The stuff we're practicing, it's not wrong, right? It's not wrong. It isolates variables, critical pieces, so the beginner, not necessarily a new student, but somebody new to that model, to that kata, whatever, right? So they can learn, right? But every training method teaches more than what we might call its obvious content, more than just the moves, right? No matter how we train, if we're stuck in a certain training format, then we're not just learning the moves. Or if we practice a certain way, the teacher can demonstrate things one way, but we have old habits or whatever, and we translate it that way, or whenever we practice, it's always the same way. It's always static, or it's always, because we're trying to get it to look right. Because if it looks right, it must function, right? We all know that, right? We've gotten together with nice looking people in the past, right? As a friend or a friend with benefits or a partner or whatever, right? And we all know, right? The better looking they are, the more sane they are, right? The better looking they are, the more of a good partner they're going to make. Somehow that doesn't equate over into martial arts. Because anyway, but my point is that the training method, it also teaches assumptions. Unless it becomes very clear that, look, everything that we do is an expedient. It's designed to do something or help us develop certain abilities or whatever to get us to that next level, but things have to change, okay? It's kind of like in the fitness world, right? A fit, let's say a muscular guy, right, can help a non-muscular guy become muscular. He just says, look, this is what I did to get muscular. Here's your plan. Do that. But that same plan won't help that muscular guy pack on more muscle. He'll hit a plateau. He will have to change his regimen to go to the next level. This is no different. Okay? So if the student repeats the same, let's say, spatial relationship, the same distance, the same angling, that kind of thing, often enough without having that assumption exposed, like the 45-degree angle. Okay? For a beginner, the 45-degree angle is off of the point where they're standing. And it's off of a straight punch or a straight kick. But when the angle changes, because that angle, the naname, since it was very clear early on, once people got it, he started using this term naname, and they're like, yeah, we understand. 30 degrees, 40. No. He said it's not 30 degrees, it's not 45 degrees, it's not 2 degrees, it's not 20 degrees, it's not 270 degrees. It's angled to the line of the attack while profiled or positioned relative to the attacker's center or the part of their body you're about to affect. Oh, and I thought this was going to be easy. Right? So, but if we keep doing the same thing and that goes unchecked, we don't start practicing against jabs, right crosses, right? Taekwondo kicks, Muay Thai kicks, whatever, right? Then, see, what ends up happening is if we keep doing that same thing over and over again and it doesn't get, the assumption doesn't get exposed, right? Then that front-facing setup, it stops feeling like a temporary teaching arrangement. It stops feeling like an expedient to teach us something. This is the way the brain works. This is not me theory, right? It begins feeling like the natural shape. It begins feeling like, and the subconscious starts associating with it like, that's it. That's real. I got this. Okay? Because what we've done, rather than developing an ability, we developed a habit. Abilities are like tools. You use the thing that you need to accomplish the task that needs to be accomplished. A habit, you find yourself doing after you were doing it. Biting your nails, whatever, right? There's all these habits that people pointed out and the person goes, was I doing that? But they don't even know they're doing it. Okay? And we have to be careful, right? And for a long time in my training, I was there too, until I got pointed out, until I was forced to. And when I say forced, I wasn't really forced. I could go train someplace else where they were doing things the way I liked it, because it's going to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. Okay. The scrolls say the training should be more uncomfortable than any situation we could ever find ourselves in. Now be careful. The brain can be trained for this. The mind, the ego, likes to convince us we're already there. It'll listen to lessons like this, hear one little snippet, and just start racing ahead so that it could drop something in the comments or tell the teacher that you really do know what he's talking about and how, without saying I'm the prodigy that understands everything already, right? It still says that. So we have to be careful, right? So again, right, it starts convincing us, and then we get introduced to a new technique or a drill or whatever that makes something come in from another direction, or the student may have, let's say they may know a technique, right, that attacks a limb. Let's say they know onikudaki, right? So they've got this thing and they know ura onikudaki, omonte onikudaki, whatever, right? And so they know how to do this to the thing, right? And that's what they have, but they don't have the orientation or the alignment that puts the arm where it's supposed to be. They just know his arm is in an L, and I make another upside down L that forms a box, and then I do this. And then what ends up happening is instead of the uke going backwards toward the ground, right, the person has it and they tweak it, and next thing you know, the uke is like patting them on the back or whatever because they're cranking on it, right? But the uke is right there, and maybe they're working with somebody different. That person goes, no, I could hit you. No, I could punch you. And they're just cranking on even more. And this person's like, and now you're just pissing me off. I don't want to punch you. Right? So they know this thing, but because things always happened in a certain direction, they don't know how to catch it from that direction. Okay, I'm going to talk about this next week when we dive into this shihodori basic concept where, again, I described this earlier, whether we do omote gyaku, ura gyaku, o gyaku, any of the techniques, right? And we're not just going to go, well, you're going to go, if he throws a right punch, you go back into the left and you come in and shoot-though him on the neck with the right hand. And if he throws a left punch, you're going to go back and to the left and then come in and shoot-though him on the other side with your left hand. No. Same technique, same end result from 4 different directions. And that's just a start, because then it expands to 8 and then it expands to infinite directions. But there's an alignment between the bodies. So anyway, that's for another day. So again, this is why just teaching, right, a rear choke or a full Nelson or a rear bear hug or whatever, right, rear collar grab. Important though those lessons are, it doesn't completely solve the problem. Okay? Because to the average person, there are exceptions to the rule. The rule is our default perception of where danger is going to come from. What if he grabs you this way? Oh, okay. So they're an exception to the rule, or they're an interesting thing, or oh yeah, I forgot about that. He grabbed me from the right. But if he grabs me right, then his friend's going to punch me in the face. So we still default to wanting something to be happening somewhere else. Okay. And at first, I mean, it's a good start, right? At first, those techniques simply add one more known starting direction. Okay. So at least in that moment, right, the student understands the attacker can be in front of me or he can be behind me. But the student still begins the exercise already knowing what? Which person is the attacker? It's their uke. We just decided, hey, you want to work together? Awesome. Right? They don't have to pick them out of a crowd. They don't know which person, like Trim was talking about earlier, right? That person that's kind of shadowing me as they're moving, right? She pulled a really good trick on somebody that was doing that, and it's pretty slick. So I'm going to get her to share that at the fall intensive. Anyway, but they already know who their attacker is, right? They already know what else. They already know what form the attack will take. It's not going to be a surprise. Since they demonstrated, that's what we're working on. Okay. They already know from which direction it's going to come. Again, not a surprise. It's a bear hug. It's a half Nelson. It's a hook punch to the face, or a straight punch, or a straight kick, or whatever. What else do they know? They know when it's going to start. Right? He says, "Are you ready?" You go, "Yes." Anytime after that, here it comes. Right? So we're already on alert. We're not on. When was the last time I checked my email or my text messages? Let me do that. Oh, shit. Right? They also know which role each person is expected to maintain. Right? I'm the defender. He's the attacker. Cool. Right? Now we're going to switch. I'm the attacker. He's the defender. Okay? But if we really get this, then things change, right? The question goes from those assumptives to what if the relationship, orientation, whatever, right, starts in one direction, rotates through another, and leaves you vulnerable along a third without stopping long enough for anyone to reset or rename the roles. Attacker, defender, that kind of thing, right? So usually the defender doesn't experience this as much, but an awake and aware uke does. Because the uke starts off in attacker orientation. I'll talk about that in a bit, right? Attacker orientation. They know they're launching they're initiating the attack, what they're throwing, that kind of thing, right? But then the defender avoids and counters. Well, guess what? to the uke, I punched here because he's right there. Now I have a counter coming in on this angle. Oh, shit, right? And so I evade that, and now something's coming in. I'm facing this way. Now something's coming in over here. Or he catches me a certain way, or whatever, right? Or I punch and he evades to the outside over here, and now he's to my right rear. See, we might start noticing these things if we're proactive as the uke and not just doing what the defender needs until it's my turn. Because it is my turn. Uke learns a lot. Okay? Because the uke, if we come at it from the perspective of the uke, we can get these 8 directions and an understanding of shit. Things can come at me from more than just in front, way faster. Every time I train. Okay? And this is why I say the attack doesn't remain in the direction from which it began. Okay? Can't. Even if I'm a defender, throws that straight punch and I shift offline, the next one is coming in from a different angle, depending on the angle that I move to, right? And this is something that's universal across problem solving, time management, all that, right? It's impossible to solve a problem without creating another one. Okay? See, again, the mind wants to think in terms of finality. Reality, it doesn't work that way. Okay? If I have a loneliness problem, I don't have a girlfriend problem, or I have a girlfriend problem, right? What I mean by that is not that I have one who is a problem. I mean, I don't have a girlfriend. Okay? So I have to do certain things to get a girlfriend. I know, I'm married. Stay with me here, right? Okay? I have to do certain things to get a girlfriend. I get a girlfriend. Now I don't have a girlfriend problem anymore. I have a how do I keep a girlfriend? How do I vet a girlfriend to make sure that I don't end up losing my sanity because of their lack of one? Whatever, right? Girlfriend, boyfriend, replace the gender. I don't care, right? But I have a different problem. How do I keep her? Right? And I got this girlfriend for long term, right? But is she wife material? Is she long-term partner material? That's a problem. I have to do certain things to determine whether. Problem most people have is they make assumptions. Okay, so I have to make sure they're long-term partner material, teammate, not live in different houses, meet up, hook up, shuffle to the door, whatever. I have to, right, and then good. Marriage and whatnot, right? Now I have a bunch of different problems. Maintain a household, right? Keep a wife, shit, kid comes along, whatever, right? Same thing, right? This is the way life works, right? People get overwhelmed because they inherited assumptions or weren't properly educated for clarity. Martial arts can teach us a whole lot about everyday life, right? Anyway, so what we've been discussing, right? This change of things, right? This is a natural next step from the en undo exercise that I taught last week in Whiteboard Wednesday and is in our Module 2 stuff, right? I cannot headbutt it into the heads of my students enough that they don't practice senundo, enundo, and some of these drills nearly enough. And at least 50% of them, when they practice them like there's some damn step-by-step kata that as long as they get it good enough, then they'll be fine. Because they really want to pass the test for a belt anyway. Right? I know what they say. right? And I know I sound like an asshole right now, but okay, reality doesn't stop for anybody. Okay, so Enundo teaches at the base level, it teaches these transitions between defense to offense without stopping, and offense to defense, because if I miss, shit's coming right back at me, and I need to be able to clear. Because if I stop, whatever length of time that is, that's the amount of time they have to tag me. Okay? This is not like hitting the pause play button on a remote control and everything and everybody stops and starts at the same time. So I need to get these transition things so that defense turns into offense, offense turns into defense, that kind of thing, right? Because that's in everything. Right? But the natural next step from that form of Enundo is Enundo reminds us that the movement doesn't stop. Right? I get past him, now it's over. So Enundo isn't just about the rolling over of movement to movement, back to forward, forward to back, whatever. It's also it moves, right? It's about the flow of things. Okay? Happō reminds us that because movement doesn't stop, the direction of danger doesn't remain fixed. It's constantly moving, right? He throws a punch, I shift. If he throws a right punch and I shift right rear or to the right side, or I'm in boxer mode, right, and I do a bob and weave kind of thing, yeah, I made a miss. Except now where's my target? My target's lined up with his left fist or left foot or, right? So, but we don't see this when we're working step by step. And we're following a kata, huh? Because we're only paying attention to the stuff that's happening, because it's supposed to happen, right? It's a script. Another true story. Some of you guys have heard this, but bears repeating. I was training at Ishizuka Sensei's dojo in Japan one time. I was training with this other black belt. I tend to take all patches off my uniform. I go with the uniform, plain black belt. They don't know from Adam how long I've been training, what my rank is, whatever. That's why I like it. So when I go, I'm in student mode. Don't ask me a damn thing. I'm trying to figure things out myself. Anyway, working with this guy and working this. Yes, we're working a kata. Okay. Throw this punch. Every time I initiated, he moved back into Ichimonji, Seigan, whatever, right? But his angle was off. Like he was turning his gut and groin to me. When I say he was turning, it's one thing to look like it's in range, but not. And it's another thing where, yeah, I can give you a lump in your throat you used to piss out of. Okay, you're in range. Okay, and so I thought I'd help. Thought I'd help a brother out. What I said was, I'm not here to teach. Okay, but, and I don't know if you know it or not, but every time you move against this punch, like, I want to kick you in the groin. And he goes, well, I don't have to worry about that because there's no groin kick in this kata. And I paused, and then I said, my mistake. I thought we always had to worry about getting kicked in the groin. And then I proceeded to take a potty break, came back and found another partner. We cannot forget that just because the kata has certain moves, that the bad guy is a free-thinking human being and it's not going to follow a goddamn script. Now, do we do it to make sure that we're learning the moves so we can learn the lessons in it? Yeah. Yeah. But this thing that I pointed out was a kihon. The naname angle and the distance. Even if you can see the targets, you can't reach them. Not without doing a whole bunch of extra work to get to them. Didn't matter. That kata didn't have a groin kick in it, so I don't have to worry about you kicking. Yeah, I think you do. And if we were not in Jisuke Sensei's dojo, or this was a private training session in his dojo, or we were back at my dojo, some of my students can attest to this. I will only tell you to position yourself better so that the uke cannot reach only so often. And I'm not going to kick you to damage you, but I will tap things. And it's amazing how fast a student will change their angling and their distance once things have been tapped. And it could be jumblies, it could be the lower gut, it could just be the knot of their belt to remind them that you're in range, dude. Okay? So, as one of my teachers who was a former Marine used to say, you get respect in two ways: through fear or through admiration. And then he would pause, and then he would say, I'll take what I can get. Same thing with me getting a lesson across. There's two ways I can get it across. You understand it and carry out the instructions correctly, or you think you understand it and you think you're carrying out the instructions correctly, but you're not. I can either demonstrate it and explain it, or I can execute on it in a safe way so that the subconscious, unconscious, muscle memory, visceral system gets the memo. But we only do soft training, Sensei. The Bujinkan doesn't do that anymore. Yes, it fucking does. There's classes where it's not done, and people's basics suck because they think they're doing it, but because there are no consequences for making the mistakes they're making, well, then it breeds like a virus. And that's all I'll say about that. Anyway, James, any questions or comments pop up? Anybody new sign in before I move on to the next part here? You can speak to you can speak to me tagging people, and seniors in the dojo will do it, right? We just lost Richard back in March, and I'm going to miss him, not just because I've been a student of mine since 1990, but as Sensei McLaurin's not on, right? He's on vacation, so he's probably not even on for KUDEN either, right? Right. He tells stories to students all the time. Richard was around from the very first time he trained with him, and he thought he'd pause and turn to look at me to ask a question. Richard punched him right in the face because he was still in range.
Yep.
And what he wanted to say was, but we're not trained.
Doesn't matter.
You disengage before you change roles. Now I am not in attacker-defender role. I am in student role. Give me a second. Because and the higher your belt rank, the more often Richard would throw the wrong attack, just to make sure that you were at least paying attention and getting out of the way to a safe position and not going, oh, no, it's not a punch to the face, it's a kick, right? Yeah. So, and those are good training partners. Those are seniors that want you to do well, right? They're not playing, I don't know, charades or whatever the hell it is, right? Anyway, what do you got?
Just David checked this.
Which Dave?
Butch.
Oh, okay. We're collecting Daves like we're collecting, I don't know. Anyway. All right. So, looks like we have a good group. All right. So I shall continue. Let me jump back to my notes over here. Okay. So I've been alluding to this one, but I think we can all relate, right? One of the dominant models in the martial arts and self-defense world is the picture of two people squaring off, right? They stand nose to nose, toe to toe, right? They both recognize that the confrontation has begun. How do we know that? Well, there was either a bell, ding, ding, the ref, fight, right? Or they bowed in, bumped gloves, whatever, right? the fight started, right? Both of their hands are available, right? They can see them. They both take up roughly equal footing. They're both focused on one another. I mean, there's nobody else to focus on except for the ref, and then they only have to worry about not tripping over the guy, right? Both are trying to win the same kind of contest. First obvious punch, kick, shot, grab, right? Becomes the official beginning, right? And everybody starts cheering, let's go, right? Now, there's nothing imaginary or fake or false or whatever about face-to-face fighting. It happens all the time, right? Combat sports develop real attributes, boxing, wrestling, judo, BJJ, mixed martial arts, whatever, right? All these systems, right? They contain effective skills. No contest, no argument, okay? The mistake is not training that relationship, that orientation, that approach. The mistake is allowing that one relationship, that singular commonplace relationship, to define the whole nature of violence. Okay? Nose-to-nose fighting is one point on the happō map. Just like if we were doing actual map reading, right? You know, a heading of 25 degrees might be northeast if north was directly in front of me and I was oriented to magnetic north or true north, because if I don't look at the declination diagram and know the difference, well, that could be off. Or if I haven't oriented my map to the ground itself, so I'm looking in the right direction, so at the top of the map is actually north and in front of me, right? Anyway, but it's the same thing, right? And just like in some people call it orienteering, we called it land navigation when I was in the military. The truth is that there's points on the map. Those points are not the map itself. And the map is a map of the territory, but it's not the territory. Okay? Not fixing those realities in your head can cause a lot of problems. Because on a military style map, it's 5 colors. One of those colors is a bunch of barely visible, for people who don't know what they're looking at, barely visible squiggly lines that show altitude, height. Okay? And if you're only tracking, well, dude, why are we going to, this thing says follow this path out and around this way. Why don't we just go that way? Why don't we just go straight ahead? And we don't know anything about those lines. We don't know that the farther those lines are apart from each other, the adjacent lines, the farther apart they are, right, the flatter the terrain is, and the closer they are, the more vertical the terrain is, and get ourselves in trouble. Same thing, right? The kata is, or the henka, whatever model we're using, right, is an example of a snapshot in time of a possibility against a certain type of an attack, right? But a kata is not the fight. Hell, a sparring match isn't even the fight, right? I guess it depends on how we define fight, okay? But if we're thinking survival, attack scenario, killer, no. Right? Even battlefield, no. Right? So, again, nose-to-nose fighting is one point on the happō map. It's not the map. Because if I'm trying to protect my 7-year-old grandson and he's standing off to my left and I got a hold of him so I don't trip over him, or I'm keeping him out of danger or whatnot, and I'm trying to deal with this guy over here, reorienting myself to where my 7-year-old now becomes a trip hazard or possibility for me to fall on him, and I'm concerned about, so I can keep this guy in front of me, I got a problem. Okay? And it's not always possible to say, run, go to your mom, go to your grandma. It's not always possible. Because I'm at the corner of fucking 4th and I-95. Fucking traffic flying by. My car broke down. Right? Why does he have the car? Well, I don't know. We might have stopped because he had to pee. Next thing you know, we're being carjacked. There's a ravine on one side. There's traffic on the other. Yeah. Okay. But again, if part of the reason that people do the things they do in the dojo is because the dojo is an open space. And it's not until you get filled to capacity, like one of these big seminars or whatever, where you don't have a lot of space, does it make any sense? Or you have a teacher that's an asshole, and while you're training, they start bringing chairs out from the viewing area, putting them in the floor, or bringing out training bags and whatnot, and telling you these are the corners of a building or corners of a wall or whatever. And if you bounce it, if you bump into it, I don't care if it moves or not, right? You're jammed up, okay? Or really starts bringing things in and closing it so that everybody's shoulder to shoulder and those kind of, unless you have an asshole like that, right? You don't really see things. But just like the kata is not the fight, the dojo is not the fight environment. Once we start recognizing that those things can determine, pull into a parking spot, open my car door, slid over to stand up, and the attack is coming in this way, and I've got no place else to go. Except maybe slump back into the car so he can, whatever, right? Everything changes. So I guess one of the prerequisite questions before you can even act on what we're talking about during this session is, are you training to win a fight in a ring or in a circle where everybody backed everybody up and you're 99.92% sure that nobody in that circle is going to jump your ass when you start winning? Because, it's all fair, right? Or are we trying to survive the unknown? Because that's what Hatsumi Sensei always said, right? Not teaching you how to fight one person. Teaching you to fight the unknown. Because that's what survival is. Okay? But again, one more time, nose-to-nose fighting, it's a thing, right? But for us, it's only one point on the happō map. It's not the map itself. Criminal, predatory, anger-driven, controlling, dominant-driven violence. I'm sure I missed a few. Right? Coming from those types of attackers just may include very different objectives and conditions. Okay? This is why the Q levels are for learning the tools. The black belt levels are for training scenarios and conditions. Yes, you still learn kata, but it's not about accumulation. It's about function, right? Because in the real world that I grew up in, not that you didn't, but when I say the real world I grew up in, I'm talking about being a federal cop, military for most of it, dealing with people that it's kind of like the U.S. and many other countries, and being involved in wars and skirmishes, and the enlightened soldier realizing that nobody that we've ever fought signed the Geneva Convention that governed rules of warfare until after we beat their ass. Which means that whether they were allowed to or not, they did whatever the hell they wanted. And we had rules of engagement that everybody else was going to judge us by. So, black belts, in my opinion, have no choice but to make sure that they're training based on things like an attacker concealing intent. Like he may begin inside ordinary social distance, right? He may start it out with a conversation or intimidation or distraction or surprise or compliance testing, right? Contrary to popular belief, he may grab first because he wants to control movement rather than exchange blows. That grab may be disguised as an introductory handshake. Right? He may be trying to prevent someone from leaving. He may be attempting to drag, isolate, restrain, abduct, or access a weapon. He may have an accomplice or 3 or 5 or 2 or whatever, right? He may attack from outside the defender's field of vision. He may target a child, a spouse, a friend, a client, or a companion. He may continue attacking after the defender falls. Wait, you mean there's no ref that'll step in? Yeah, he may continue attacking after you black out. My wife and I are big fans of these true crime things. I don't mean like the ones where the cops are showing up and it's just neighborhood low-class drama. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm talking about the ones that dissect like the murder, worst ex ever, worst roommate ever, whatever, right? Where the attacker didn't just kill the victim. They just continue to beat the body. Okay. So now we can't do anything after blackout, which is why it's important to stay functional. But we need to be clear about the difference between an agreed upon tough guy fight, right? A contest, and somebody who's not looking to win. It's not about winning. It's about succeeding in their attempt or plan. Okay? So the defender may not be free to square up because of terrain, clothing, injury, furniture, a vehicle, I already mentioned that, a stairwell, or the responsibility to protect someone else, right? And this is where we encounter, right? This is where we run into the martial arts naysayers, right? Who always says things like I can't remember ever grabbing someone by the wrist in a fight, or like I've never been grabbed by the wrist in a fight, or my clothing was grabbed, whatever, right? And that statement may be entirely honest. It may be, right? The person may have been in fights. They may have been in a dozen fights, right? And it's true. A clean wrist grab may never have appeared as the opening action in any of them, right? But the problem that pops up when the statement changes from "that hasn't happened in my experience," which they are alluding to, right, to the assumption or the implication that doesn't happen to anyone because of my experience, right? That doesn't happen to anyone and therefore has no relevance to self-protection. Shouldn't it be a part of fight training? Because, it's never happened to me, so therefore it doesn't happen to anybody. All right? And so what we're looking at is that person has converted an autobiography, right, into doctrine. he has treated the boundaries of his experience as the boundaries of reality. And before we scoff, so I'm constantly reminding myself of this all the time, we all do it. We just have to be careful what we do it with. Right? We make assumptions that because I think this way, well, then that's obvious. Everybody should think that way. And you know when somebody does it because they talk about common sense. Well, it should be common sense. Well, common for who? Right? But here we are, right? But a wrist or forearm may be grabbed to, James, which module did we spend time with that in? Like when somebody grabs a wrist. Oh, I know what it is. Is it mod 3, isn't it? Is that mod 3? Where we're using like knuckle buster thing on the fingers or the hands or whatever, or the forearms to get this guy to choose the distance where I can't. Yeah, isn't that where it is? Mod 3?
Yes.
Okay. And so we flash back, right? In mod 3, we're talking about we're doing this thing to get him to control the distance. So it gives us more time, but what might that do, right? Well, he might end up grabbing to get control of that thing, right? And then that causes it to flash back to, by the way, you may be working on mod 3, but you better still be working on your mod 1 stuff, because when you start using tactics like this, he might just go ahead and grab you, right? We have grab attacks in mod 2, but most people think that we just have them as lapel or sleeve grabs, but we have a drill where you're in ichimonji and this person tries to grab your wrist or knock it out of the way, and we have this little rolling drill where he misses, or if he does grab it, rolls it right out of that grip and goes right back to position. I don't know how many people actually train with ichimonji, seigan, whatever, right? And actually have somebody try to grab fast and hard to get a hold of that arm, because most attackers think ichimonji is stupid because your arm's out there. I'll just hit that, grab that, whatever. Okay? What are you going to say? No, you won't. That sounded funny. Anyway, but most people would defend ichimonji because it's a part of our art, because it's lasted for centuries, not because they tested it against somebody who doesn't give a shit, or against what somebody would actually do when that arm was stuck out there. Right? It's a political based decision, not based on actually knowing why I can make this work, even though he will try to do things, right? But anyway, same thing with wrist grabs, forearm, whatever, right? So somebody may grab the forearm, they may grab the sleeve, they may grab the wrist or whatever, right? Why? Well, to stop somebody from leaving, right? To pull them closer, to use the limb against me, right? If they yank on it and it pulls my head forward, shit, pow, they just hit me, right? To prevent somebody from opening a door, right? And leaving the room. They may stop them from, calling for help, right? They may grab the sleeve, arm, wrist, whatever, right? To prevent somebody from going for a weapon, to control the hand, the hand that's holding a weapon, right? They may grab it to take away an object. They may grab it to control a child, right? They may do it to separate a parent from a child, right? They may do it to restrain someone before striking on or with the other hand, right? The grab might not even appear as this obvious first attack at all, right? I was just watching a flailing attack a couple of weeks ago by two drunks, right? My wife and I like to go on cruise ships and whatnot, and we saw, this one video that popped up. The information was kind of negative information, right? People that show their true colors. And here are two drunks waiting for a freaking an elevator at one of these landings and stuff. and just say there's somebody filming on with their phone instead of, trying to break it up. I guess they were trying to break it up. You two should stop. You two should stop, right? While they're busy following the action. These two drunk assholes are just doing their thing, right? And one guy missed with a punch, right? And the other guy backed up and just instinctively grabbed the arm because it was the closest thing to keep him from going anywhere and to keep him close enough to do the next thing. Just came out of nowhere, right? Nobody's saying that it's the first attack. Just like nobody's saying that the beginning of a kata and the end of kata is the beginning of the fight and the end of the fight. That's a pretty common assumption as well. It's not the case. It's not even what they mean. Right? So, just like with that fight, right? The grab could happen after the punch has been deflected, after the bodies bump into each other, right? While someone's reaching for a weapon, or during that continuous transition, right, between one action and the next. It could just happen. You could deflect something, or you could get them into a position where you're about to move in, and as a panic response, oh gee, that's in the kata renyo. We're doing koku, and we deflect the kick, and then this grab comes out. Most people practice renyo as though that grab is intentional. You allowed him enough time you deflected his leg, and before you could move in, he put his foot down quickly, and might happen that way. It might. I might deflect his leg, and he might stumble away and then come back and attack. Okay, good, right? But I could deflect that leg, and it could do exactly what it's supposed to do, which is to break his balance. And because I'm the only stable thing near him, he reaches out and grabs me. Not as an attack, as a survival move. But here's this naysayer going, well, it's never happened to me, so therefore it never happens. There's actually a guy, and I don't know if he's changed his tune. I know that he's still out there doing things. Very famous, got this self-defense group or company or whatever, and he's teaching a bunch of stuff. And there was this wrist grab defense that he was teaching a bunch of years ago. And his prelude to the wrist grab defense was, this doesn't happen. It's never happened to me. It's bullshit. But since everybody's teaching it, we'll go ahead and work on these things. Well, that was kind of hypocritical. Like if you're actually adamant that they don't happen, why the flock? Or are we just going to do it because, I don't know, that's one of the most commonly searched phrases on YouTube by people who are looking to learn some self-defense. Defending against a wrist grab, defending against a sleeve grab. Well, why would they type that in if they didn't know any better? Because they've seen differently. It's what they're worried about. Interesting, right? But have I personally seen someone open a fight with a textbook wrist grab? That's not the right question. The useful question is, under what conditions might someone seize, trap, redirect, grab, or prevent the use of one of my hands? That is a much bigger and a much more realistic question. Don't you think? I think so. Right? The static grab used in introductory training, right? It's not necessarily what we may call a prophecy or whatever about exactly how the next assault will begin. It's a way to frame a lesson around learning lessons about leverage and how grips are strong and how they're weak, and using leverage to escape and those kind of things, right? It's not a fight. It's a contained lesson. So when we're actually sparring, when we're actually doing randori, when we're actually doing these things and it happens, we know what it feels like. We know certain things about pressure, force, leverage, containment, those kind of things that happen through the body, through the hand, and how the hands should hold on to things. right? So anyway, right? But again, it may just be a way of isolating a recurring relationship, right? One limb's been controlled, freedom of movement's been reduced, force is being applied through a contact point, right? One hand may be temporarily unavailable, right? A lot of people, a lot of beginners, right? It's amazing, right? We'll work off of a wrist grab defense, and the student won't be able to release the grip. They won't be able to work the technique. And they go, Sensei, I can't get away. I can't do anything. What are you talking about? And then I have to point out that they need to relax their arm so their elbow and shoulder can bend again, because he's not touching your shoulder and your elbow. But your stiffness is keeping you from being able to do something like, well, I don't know, turn around so now you can punch him with the other hand or kick him or whatever, right? But again, this goes back to that original premise, right? But again, it might be also something like in the techniques, Yubikudaki, Hanabi, the Togakure techniques in the Unsatonso kata, where the attacker is attempting to pull, push, whatever, turn, prevent, restrain, whatever, right? The grab's not always the lesson. The relationship created by the grab may be the lesson, right? And your experience is a source of information. It matters, right? That's what I would tell somebody like this. I just don't get into these barking contests. But what I would say is your experience is a source of information, right? It is, right? And it matters. But it remains one observation point, not the entire battlefield. Okay? I have seen people hopping on their feet in Ichimonji because their background was Taekwondo. And their kamae was too big to be functional, and because they perceived it to be too slow against a real attack, what that tells me is the person doesn't know how to use their kamae. But it's too slow to use against it. Then they started, they took up this kamae as a stance and used it as if they were in this other martial art with conflicting principle sets. It would make me hurt if I cared. I can't make somebody learn the right lessons. But if they're going to try to look at something and then translate it based on their own experience and their own filters and not learn what it's really designed to be used for and why and how, karma's a bitch. Anyway, so if you're watching live, tell me whether you have encountered this kind of reasoning in martial arts discussions, right? What attack, what technique or training method have you heard dismissed because one person said, that's never happened to me, or that won't work in a fight, or whatever, okay? I'll go first. The number of times that I have been told that you can't do a mushadori or an onikudaki in a real fight. I've done mushadori, conservatively speaking, half a dozen times, minimum, in an actual situation against somebody who was not going to be compliant. Okay. Onikudaki twice that I can remember. But it's been shown up in my comments. I've heard people in the Bujinkan say, you can't really do this in a real fight. I don't argue. It's not my place. Because I'm not going to argue, and then they'll do you have that documented? Oh, yeah. Because in the 80s, we had everybody filming everything on the camera on their phone instead of like calling the cops or trying to help the cop or whatever. No. So there's no point in arguing, because we're just going to be arguing over positions. But one of us, what I will do every once in a while is say something like, I'm sorry that didn't work out well for you when you tried it. And I've yet to have someone come back and say, yeah, it didn't work for me. It didn't work. Usually what ends up happening, more often than not, because usually I get hit with silence, but when they do respond, they go, I'd never ever try to do that bullshit. Okay. So now we have a presupposition that it won't work, and you've never tried it, but you're going to make a definitive judgment call that something that has survived for millennia won't work in a real fight. See, now we can't have a conversation, not because I don't like you, but because I don't have a conversation. Like if I were working on my car engine and my 6-year-old, well, he's now 7, right, grandson said, Grandpa, maybe it would work better if you unplugged that thing there and plugged it in over there, right? Not going to get into an argument with him. What I'm going to say is, dude, that's a really good idea. Can you hand me that wrench? Thanks, man. Good helping. So anyway. But on the other side, here's another question. What has someone treated as universally important simply because it happened to them once? Okay. Let me know. James, anybody dropping anything in yet? Any other comments or questions pop up that I can handle before
No.
we get to those?
Nothing's coming.
No? All right. So those questions normally go out to people that have been around for a while and or they actually have real world experience. Because Hatsumi Sensei, most of the master teachers, I say most because I haven't interacted with all of them, and several of the Dai-Shihan, like, we have real world experience. You know what else we have? What else do we have, James? Guess. Experience with the same kind of fucking comments. This, right? And I just heard it again from another Dai-Shihan that, like, I wish that more people had a background like yours, or a background that crossed the barrier between training and real world, because you can learn this stuff. I mean, you can learn it from this stuff, but your learning gets accelerated, and what you're looking at and how you're going to translate it is very, very different between wanting to learn a martial art or wanting to learn self-defense so you don't get hurt, and having been in that bubble more than once and knowing what conditions exist that this stuff is pointing to. Because you can't write it all out. James, can you imagine one altercation or one attack and then writing out everything that you've got to, like, awareness, dun, 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 right? This, and then it would still be flawed. It would still be lacking because that was just one condition. It was just one situation, right? It certainly wasn't all things, right? So anyway, and we all do the best that we can with what we do, but we need to recognize that whether we want to or not, we're filtering things. So we have to ask ourselves, all right, what am I filtering? And if we don't know, we have to go find somebody that does know and go, what am I missing? A lot of people avoid tests. Well, in the Bujinkan, we don't get involved in fights and stuff like that. Really? That's not what I heard. Okay. And I'm not just talking about the assholes. I'm talking about from master teachers who have said you should not be afraid to test what you know with other people from other arts or other systems or whatever. Win or lose, you're going to learn a lot. That doesn't mean run around and try to get into fights. Doesn't mean that. Okay. But if you have an opportunity to share techniques or knowledge or whatever, even if all you're going to do is practice your evasion and your footwork and your naname and your taisabaki and whatever, and not even try to land any shots on them, be a good test. Okay? Be a good test. What we have found out is that usually the other person won't want to do more than like 5 minutes or so, because they usually want to take their ball and go home if they can't land a shot. Because, like, what's the point, right? Because this is a big thing. I'll cover this here shortly. It's the difference between a mindset that has to win and a mindset that's just trying to not lose. It's not the same. But to the winner-oriented mindset, well, if I'm not winning, then I'm losing. Or I can't be a loser. I'm not trying to not lose. I mean, to me, not losing is getting to go home safely. Not going to the hospital, the ER, the morgue. Being able to go to work tomorrow. And understand, it's safe and it's comfortable in the dojo. James knows. I bring people in from other systems to teach breakout sessions for like our weekend intensives, so that they can highlight, look, we don't do these things, but if somebody in this system gets you in this position, right? And why'd we do that? Well, we had him teach the breakout session so we could look at defending. Well, you can't get out of this thing. Okay, but what if we started from the you got to get me in it first perspective? Because most beginners think from the perspective of not getting hit, not getting grabbed, not getting put in the lock, whatever. And I get it, but that's the farthest place downstream, right? The intensives are designed for people farther upstream who can recognize the fight posture or the approach, or just can you read I'm a martial artist vibes from somebody who's not in a gi, not in a dojo, just based on their demeanor, or somebody that has fight experience, maybe not martial artist, but they carry themselves as a very peaceful, person who negotiates things, and they're the peacekeeper and stuff like that. But something about it tells you, yeah, he can take care of himself. You ever take martial arts before? You're taking a couple of lessons. Yeah, I'm reading more than a couple of lessons. Hatsumi Sensei is really big on us being able to know. So far forward that he was, when I took my test, my 5th dan test, he was telling the 10th dans that, because that's the highest that things were back then, right? That you should be able to tell whether somebody could pass the test or not when they walked up and before they sat down. Tell me how that has anything to do with ducking punches. That's being able to read somebody so far upstream, they don't even have to take a posture. They don't even have to be able to open their mouths. We'll talk about that maybe in, what's this, episode 316, 318. So I think 2 episodes from now. Anyway, let me get back to things so I can get this wrapped up. All right, so let's put ourselves in the position usually assigned to the defender. Okay, the attacker begins in front of us. He throws the punch. We evade. We intercept. We counter. Right. We appear to gain initiative. Right. We start to be doing well. Right. So in the conventional training picture, right, he has now become uke, and we become tori. Right. He's the quote unquote attacker. We're defender. But what happens when our counter misses? What happens when he parries it? I don't know that, Kato Sensei. Okay. We have kata like that. Right? We have ones where we deliver that finishing blow that in one kata, it's over. But another kata in another school, same thing leading up to it. You deliver that stomp kick, he drifts back, and next thing you know, he's coming back in. Okay? What happens when our grip slips, or we go to catch that wrist for the armbar and we miss, or it's July or August and we're both sweaty and we slip off each other, right? What happens when he turns with the lock? And it either takes longer to get it or we miss it altogether. What happens when he catches our arm, passes our shoulder, or slips behind us? You've seen those movies, right? What happens when the environment prevents the footwork that we expected or that we are good at, or it's not conducive to flat, even floor in the dojo, us wearing tabi, and now we're wearing hikers or slip-ons or whatever, and there's potholes everywhere, or we're in the grass instead of on the sidewalk and the ground's bumpy. What happens when another person enters from a direction that we weren't paying attention to? Okay. The point here is that the entire situational alignment between bodies can change very quickly. If you've ever been in more than just a pushing, shoving match or a controlled martial arts sparring match, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? This is where drills come in. This is where randori has its place. Right? But what I'm talking about here is the person who had become the defender, right, may suddenly be functioning as the uke again because he got the jump on you. He turned it around, right? Now we're receiving force, we're losing position, we're needing to defend, evade, recover, whatever. And this is why as students move toward the advanced levels, we begin dropping not only the permanent uke and tori designations, but also the fixed labels of attacker and defender. This is not about a moral thing, right? Because somebody went out of their way to jump you. Yeah, okay, right? They're an attacker. They're an assailant. Okay? But attacker, defender as a moral judgment, like the attacker's always the bad guy, the defender's always the good guy. No, we start dropping that. Okay? In the beginning, those labels were useful. Right? They help the student understand the exercise. They help with orienting, like, who attacks this time? Oh, you do. Okay. So I know I'm working on the defense finish kind of thing, right? So I attacked last time, you attacked this time. So we have a relative orientation as to what's supposed to happen, who's supposed to do what. Right? But if we're looking at things at a higher level, a couple of weekends ago, when I was, if anybody knows Rob Renner, he's back in the States for a while before he goes back to Japan. So he was teaching in Florida, Maryland. I went to that one. Then he was teaching in Georgia. I think he's supposed to be on the West Coast here soon. Isn't that, James? Do you know his schedule? Is he on the West Coast soon? I know he's just in Georgia.
Not sure exactly. It's usually where he heads, I believe.
Okay, and then he heads back, right?
I think so, yeah.
But so he was covering basics, but the basics were from the perspective of the uke doesn't comply, right? If you're not breaking their balance, they're not stepping. Even if you do break their balance, they can step and catch themselves. Right? They can resist. They can take their hand away from you. Whatever. Because if you have your basics, then it shouldn't matter what they can do. It won't work. And we're not talking about ichimonji no kata. Ichimonji no kata is not a basic. It's not a basic. If we were talking about music, it's a simple song stringing together a couple of notes that a beginner should find easier to play. Like we're not playing Beethoven's Fifth or Flight of the Valkyries or whatever, right? It's just here's a couple of basics, right? Kamai, you have Ashi Sabaki to go to this naname angle, right? You're doing this certain type of ashi or uke nagash, and then you're entering a certain way, controlling balance, access, those kind of things as you deliver this follow-up, right? No, we're talking about distance, access, right? The ability to control one's strength and force and things like that, so that you can effectively resist those kind of things, right? Basics are the things that take those things away. Basics at that level are understanding what allows structure needed or to form that's needed for speed or resistance or strength or whatever, balance, those kind of things, right? It's understanding kazushi as a basic, but not from the beginner's perspective of just balance breaking. Because you can break somebody's balance and they can catch it very quickly. The brain and the body is really good at that. No, kazushi. Undermining the structure necessary for them to catch themselves without collapsing. And kazushi, the word of kazushi itself does not translate to balance breaking. It implies that balance breaking could be a part of it, but kazushi itself doesn't mean balance breaking. I'll let you look that up. That could be a whole different thing, right? So, but if we stick to uke and tori or attacker and defender, those kind of things, right? And even uke doesn't mean attacker, but again, that's for a different episode. So those two labels also consciously, unconsciously, whatever, communicate or point to certain assumptions, right? The attacker acts first, the defender waits, the attacker initiates a recognizable physical technique, right? The defender is justified only after that technique begins. The attacker remains the attacker throughout the entire exchange. The defender remains reactive or responsive throughout the same exchange, right? Whoever starts first must be the attacker. Right? Those assumptions eventually become limitations, big limitations. Right? These are why I also use terms like bad guy, good guy, or techie and protector. Not because those words are perfect, but because they help, right? They help separate the bigger ethical and strategic relationship from the momentary physical function, right? Because technically, the attacker is whoever is throwing something at the other person's body or trying to do something to or on that person's body. The defender is the person trying to resist, evade, or otherwise stop that thing from happening. See, it's not a good guy, bad guy relationship. It's a reality-based relationship. If I am, you can call it counterattacking all you want, but attacking is a part of the word, right? The person, when he throws a punch at me, he's the attacker. And I'm doing uke nagash and using my tai sabaki to avoid that. In that moment, in that instant, I'm the defender. But the moment I do something to break his balance and reach out with that shito to hit him on the neck, I'm the attacker. That doesn't make me the bad guy. It makes me the person launching something against his body. Right? The techie, the attacker, is the person creating the unjust danger, or they're what might say, they're pursuing a harmful objective, right? They're the one going out of their way to harm somebody that didn't want to be a part of that mess. That's a techie. Techie in Japanese means enemy. Okay? There's a very specific connotation to that, which is why in the actual kata descriptions, you don't find the word uke very often at all. You see teki and a couple of other ones that they don't mean the same thing as uke does. They're not helpful. This person is trying to beat, break, or kill you. Right? He's an enemy. He's an assailant. He's an aggressor. Not uke, the receiver of the technique. Uke means to receive. But he's throwing something at me. He's not receiving anything. He's trying to receive the contents of my wallet, maybe. Right? The protector is the person acting to preserve life, safety, freedom, or another legitimate protective responsibility. Look up the word for tori, look up the translation for tori. Not the implied one, what the kanji means. Okay? But within that larger relationship, right? Techie, person creating that unjust danger, right? The protector, person doing their thing, right? Within that larger relationship, the functions can change back and forth. Who moves first, right? Who currently has initiative? Who's receiving force? Who's applying control? Who must evade? Who's off balance, right? Who appears in that instance to be attacking, right? In our curriculum, this becomes important as early as Mod 3, when students begin working with preemptive techniques. A lot of students, I know I was when we first started working on that stuff way back in the day, right? Kotoryu Chuden no kata, where he's approaching, he might be intimidating, but you put a quick whack on his ass and drop him to the ground. He didn't get a chance to throw anything. Well, a lot of people have a problem with those techniques because they don't look legal. They don't look liable or liability conscious, right? But Mod 3 people start working on this stuff, right? The protector may be the first person to throw the visible strike and still remain the protector. Preemptive engagement. But if we don't know what we're looking at, see, because Mod 3 people need to learn the difference between a preemptive defensive action and going at the wrong time. You still threw the first punch, or you still threw it, but he can now defend against it. Right? But from an observer standpoint, they might have a real hard time when it comes to like legal kind of things, because they saw him wind up, but you hit him first. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I can't let that thing hit me. Or he's bigger, stronger, faster, whatever, and I've got to disrupt his structure before it can organize and make that fist or make that punch a problem. This is the difference between learning moves and learning anatomy, physiology, and the science behind why this stuff works. Right? But again, the protector may be the first person to throw something, right? The techie, right, may be covering, retreating, or receiving force and still remain the person who created the danger, or still might be dangerous. Just like a boxer, right? The boxer can cover against one and come right out of that into a shot. He's not dangerous just because you got him to cover. Okay? So who moves first does not necessarily determine who initiated the conflict. Right? Like I said, the Koto Ryu Chuden stuff, he's moving in, intimidating, and I've got to catch him before he hits that point, plants that foot where the attack's going to come. Past masters already have the stuff wired in. Okay? Said another way, the first person to use force is not always the person who initiated the danger. History is full of those kind of situations. War started, whatever. Well, they fired the first shots. Yeah, but they didn't start it. Okay? They escalated it, but they didn't start it. Okay? Conflict may have been initiated, right, through positioning, threats, blocking an exit, attempted isolation, weapon access, right, target selection, coordination with accomplices, and shit starting to get real, right? Compliance testing, I talked about that stuff before, right? The creation of conditions from which the physical assault is about to be launched. And we can't wait for that to happen. If we believe that it's always going to be from the front, and we always believe that for it to be self-defense, we have to let him throw the first shot, there's a lot of attackers out there. Their build, their ability, that kind of stuff, you can't let them get that shot off. Nothing else will matter after that. Right? So the protector's preemptive action may be the first obvious physical force without being the first aggressive act in the bigger picture. Okay? Now, to be clear, this does not mean that anyone who calls himself protector is automatically correct. Okay? The name does not prove righteousness. Just like when I was a cop, pulled two people apart that were fighting, right? Both claiming self-defense, did not make them a defender. Did not make them, no. Okay? So again, we need to evaluate this stuff. This is why situational or scenario-based training is important. Okay, we have a drill. I think I talked about this in a recent episode, but we have a drill for black belts that requires them to perceive intent in the middle of physical force. Wait, what? Nobody's going to touch me. Anybody even reaches out to touch me, I'm going to beat his ass. Okay, that's exactly why the drill exists. Okay, so we create a situation where one of two partners is going to reach out and grab. Okay, now before the defender comes into the room, these two people have decided two things. One, who's friend and who's foe. Because as soon as you decide that, there's a certain type of energy. Okay, they're not allowed to switch roles. Okay, they choose who's friend and who's foe, and then they decide who's carrying out the grab and yank. Because no matter who's friend, no matter who's foe, the physical action on the defender's body is still the same. There will be a double lapel grab and a yank to the side, and then a lifting of the hand. And then right after that, if it's foe, that hand turns into a punch. And if it's friend, the hand pats him on the chest and says, man, there was a freaking motorcycle that almost hit you. So one is an action to save the person, and one is an action to yank them off balance to set them up for an actual continued violence. That's advanced training. Because if the defender, if the receiver of the action, because the other two are basically controllers, the receiver of the action, if as soon as the hands are on, goes into defensive action, and it's against a friend, they're both getting their asses run over. And if they wait too long against a foe, they're going to get jacked. This is reality. But most people don't go that far. And that's why people go to jail. That's why people go to the morgue. That's why people get sued civilly. They learned all this stuff, martial arts, self-defense, or whatever. But they didn't, in their attempt to handle more difficult situations, they didn't step outside of the physical conditions. I don't like doing break falls. I don't like doing rolls. Whatever. Okay, great. I know one guy trained martial arts. He's really good. Got into a pissing contest after drinking at a bar. Got knocked backwards, stumbled, fell back into a plate glass window. Died on the way to the hospital, bleeding out. The glass came down like a freaking guillotine. Didn't decapitate him, but it certainly opened a whole bunch of tubes that he needed. Would he have been able to do a break fall if he weren't inebriated? I don't know. If you can't do something, you don't train. Anyway, so let me just keep on going with this. I'm going to jump over some notes here. Skip over that because we've all seen the situations. I was going to make reference to the video clips that we all see where, you know, the person who created it or they clipped it at a certain start point because they had an agenda. They wanted you to believe certain things. Okay. It's the same kind of idea, right? I'm going to skip over that story too. I was going to share a story where the attack could actually start in the attacker's mind, not out in the real world. Like I got attacked once because of the way I walk. And he saw little to no arm swing. I mentioned that before, right? Good taijutsu. And equated that with military, equated that with baby killers, equated that with I was somebody that needed to be taught a lesson or whatever. Two things happened that day. One, I realized the irony because I didn't learn to walk that way. But he was associated with military walking. I didn't learn to walk that way in the military. I learned to walk that way from this art. So, right. But I could be doing absolutely nothing or not even know what I'm doing. And someone could decide that I'm offensive. I'm a threat. But I'm an attacker and wasn't doing anything close. And two, he learned that I didn't learn to walk in the military. But he learned it. He was sure of himself, but he was wrong. Anyway, all right. So, but the point here is that the observation point's not the entire battlefield, right? Just because somebody didn't experience something, whatever, right? I talked about the person with the wrist grabs and all that, but that goes to anything, right? There's just, right. But what this really brings us back to is this. We need to recognize, right, that we may have fallen victim to assumptive thinking. And I can't say for sure or not, because lots of people know lots of rules, safety rules and all that kind of stuff. And if I mention them, they go, everybody knows that. Except that if I watch them, students, are you listening? If I watch them and how they act and how they do things, they can know it in their head, but they're not doing it. So they're no different than everybody else that's walking around the world. Same thing. Well, I know that I could be attacked from any direction, since I'm prepared for that. Okay. Now look at your training. What do you practice most of the time? Because when we're in default mode, that's what we do. That's how we've wired our system, from perception to awareness. That's what we're most prepared for. The things we do the least, we can think we're prepared because we've practiced those techniques. So, I have a statement in, I think they're in all the student workbooks, and they should be in the black belt packets as well. James, you can confirm this for me or not, or any of my students that are listening. There's a statement in there that says nothing here should be seen as a statement or implication that this is all there is, or something to that effect. James, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. It's in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that doesn't mean the curriculum is vague, right? It doesn't mean that anything the student invents is equally correct. Like they can do whatever they want. Okay. It means that the curriculum gives the student what is needed at the current stage without pretending that that teaching model exhausts the whole art. That's the whole thing. Okay? The category is a doorway into perception, not a wall around possibility. Okay? This is how our art works, right? Did a couple of coaching sessions on, I'm just grabbing one copy because I've got 3 copies of the Bunsen Shoot Guide, but in many sections in here, even in the beginning sessions, there's 2 sections on Seishin. There's 4 or 5 sections. Remember, these were individual books, right? That are guidelines for commanders, those kind of things, right? And it will jump into and start describing. That's a Jonian. Start describing like tactics for doing something, right? And then all of a sudden it'll end, and it'll just say you'll be given the rest via KUDEN, right? Word of mouth. Right? Because they weren't going to write the shit down. Okay. I've got a copy of technique descriptions on spear from Hatsumi Sensei and a couple of other things, right? And so it'll start to give you descriptions, and then it ends with there is a KUDEN. Those things aren't often translated into these technique descriptions that are passed around that everybody likes to collect. They usually leave those things off, just like they also leave off the kanji at the beginning of the description that says Jiyu. We might write it Jiyu. Jiyu. Okay. Jiyu can mean, I mean, just in my notes, I just write it out as formlessly adaptive, or I know what it means, so I don't write anything out for it. But Jiyu, those kanji mean that something occurred before this moment. And so when it says uketsuki, or the enemy is punching at your face or whatever, right? That's like you turn the TV on to a station or to a Netflix show or whatever that's you can't start at the beginning. I've got some of these stations that just run like Tubi and some of these other ones where they're on a schedule, right? I can watch what I want, but it's on a schedule. It's not where I just hit play, right? And so it's like the old TV things, right? So I started, and this is where it starts. He's saying this, she's saying that, whatever. The cars, whatever, right? This scene. I know that I didn't start at the beginning of the show or at the beginning of the movie, so my brain automatically knows, well, of course, something happened before this. Shit, I'm going to have to watch this the next time it comes around because I need to catch the first third or whatever of that episode. I might just be biding my time until the next one comes on, right? But something came before it. That's what GU is. So in those kata, you're either supposed to be doing some sparring or some randori before it, so you can pick up on that moment, right? Or you create a pattern, right? He might throw a lead, cross, lead, lunge, and on the lunge, you do the rest of it, right? But it gets you practicing to realize that, oh shit, this is not the whole fight. You can also do things where at the end, your partner can counter that, evade it, whatever, and then throw something else. Or you can change roles. You can work any technique where the uke initiates the exchange, but you can work in counters for the attacker, for the uke person who initiated, right, where they win. Counter each movement in a kata, so that then you come back through and the tori learns how to counter the counter, and then the uke learns how to counter the countered counter. That you can build henka that way, because the reality is there are no unbeatable techniques. I know if I popped your bubble on that one, I apologize, but had to happen sooner or later. Okay. And the sooner you learn that, the sooner you learn how to recover from a counter that somebody does. That's why in Mod 5 and from Shodan to Nidan, we have something called throw flow. And what that means is the student first learns that no technique is unbeatable. And then they learn that any failed or failing technique is actually the setup for something else. Unless you're dying or things are going black, there's something. If not, well, then you're losing. Okay? But just because you can't think of anything or you haven't learned a counter doesn't mean that they don't exist. So people learn, let's say we're doing an onikudaki, and he starts slipping that a certain way. Well, look at that. Well, that's a setup for a mushadori. So if I'm doing an onikudaki and he slips that and the conditions are right, I can turn my body a certain way, straighten out my arm, and you're right. He escaped an onikudaki and gave me a mushadori. Or I might be getting this and he shoots it out straight, right? And that might, right, I have it this way, shoots it out straight, and it turns into a teimakura, or I drift with it, turn it into an oragyaku, whatever, right? Might turn into something else, might just straightens out, throw that shuto, that moves the arm in space, turns into something else, whatever. So they learn how to go from omote gyaku into onikudaki, from whatever, right? Ganseki nage into musodori, whatever. Okay, not because they wanted to, but because they realized they learn when it's working and when it's not. And when it's not, what's the next technique that's in line for that? So they learn the techniques way, way better. Okay. And they also learn two things. One, to not marry themselves or chain themselves to a freaking technique. So when it's failing, they stop struggling to keep it. It's gone. Move on, right? And they also learn that when a technique fails, to not quit and give up. Oh, I lost it. And lost a couple of girlfriends in my life. Fantastic. Found one, coming up on 20 years. Okay. So, yeah, that's reality. Okay. So again, right. These are just important phases, but it breaks things, right? So just like the attacker's not always coming from the front, the technique as we learned it, right? Just because it was put in front of our face first doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. Okay. Anyway, let me jump over a couple of other things here because I want to get to something important before we wrap this up. Okay, so at this point, somebody may conclude that the answer is to include every possible perspective, every possible interpretation, technique, agenda, whatever. But that creates the opposite problem. Okay, expanded perception without discernment can produce paralysis. Right? We can know so many things, but not know which one to do in the moment because we don't. With techniques, right? We learn how to do them, but we don't learn how to recognize the setup for them at certain angles, or when a technique is not possible, even when it looks like it's close. I was just doing this with students a couple months ago. We were working musha dori and things like that. We're doing the basic setup, right? And then I had to move to different angles. And newer students with it, right, would go, I'd say, is musha dori, is it doable from here? And they go, yeah. And I go, well, how do you know? Well, because his elbow's bent and my hand's on the inside of his arm. Okay, great. Try it. And they would do everything they could to get that arm. Okay. I would do it, right? Get it, go to the same angle. Okay, do you think I can do it? Yeah, you could probably do it because you've been, no, I wouldn't even choose it. Why not? His elbow's bent even more and your hand's on the inside. Yeah, I know, but the point of my elbow's on the outside of his arm. I can't get around that point. So you're only using two indicators. I'm reading pressure, and I already know that part of my arm is on the other side of his arm. I need most of my arm on the inside of his arm so that this will just slide up in there regardless of whether he tenses up or doesn't, straightens out or doesn't, or whatever. He can't affect my arm the same way from here as he can from here. Okay? It's just I've been around the block a couple extra weeks. So this has to be learned, though. Okay? So, in leadership, right? Many people may certain types of leadership, many people may be allowed to contribute, or just it may be open, right? They can contribute valuable information, right? Without all of them being allowed to steer the ship. Your opinion matters. But whether or not we use the suggestion is dependent on where we're going and whatever. We've all worked in companies. I'm sure a lot of you still do. Okay? They may have suggestion boxes. Suggestion boxes suck. Suggestion boxes suck. Okay? That's not because I have my own business and I don't want to hear suggestions. I do. Suggestion boxes suck for 3 reasons. And before we even talk about the company making you feel like you're valuable. I'm not even talking about that. 1, they suck because a lot of people put suggestions in, not because it's going to cut down on expenses, improve income, anything like that. They drop suggestions in because they just want to do shit their way. That's all. They want, if everybody else just did it the way I want to do it, everybody else would be happier. I know I would. Yeah, no shit. Okay. Second reason they suck is because it may be a good idea, but the company may have just started a new initiative. Like the person knows nothing about company operations and doesn't want to, right? They want to help and they have good intentions, but they don't know the bigger picture. So the company may have just started an initiative in this direction, see this thing and go, that's a really good idea. But you know what? We need to, like, they may have a policy, right? Or it's just good science to let this thing run for a couple of weeks to 3 months to get a baseline to see, is it making things better? Is it making things worse? Is it not having any change at all? And it's going to be too expensive to just realign things. It's not worth it, right? But this is a good idea. So let's get through this thing and then we'll kick it in. Well, if they don't communicate to the person, that was a good idea. We just started, whatever. If there's not good communication, they could just go radio silent. And now this person just believes, oh, fuck it. They didn't care anyway, right? And then 3-4 months later, when they kick it in, right? Now this person might believe that, oh, fuck. They didn't want to do it when I put the idea in, but now it was one of their ideas. So, but see, there's no communication to let them know. Again, it sucks, right? And the third reason is the person who submits the suggestion, again, may think that this is going to do well, right? And it might, okay? But in all honesty, if a suggestion, even if it's going to save on expenses or increase income, if it's not going to make at least a 25% change in either direction, it will cost the company more to implement it than it will get in a return on investment. So often people put it in because they either can't see the bigger picture or they want recognition. Well, it would have done something. But see, that's the same mentality as when somebody says, like, if we do this and it saves just one life, it will have been worth it. Okay. Then how many things in life should be removed or changed because they kill at least one person? So if we're going to extend that logic, then cars and a whole bunch of other things should go away. But again, ego's really good at justifying things. So anyway, we'll get off that bandwagon. But again, right, I learned in the military that neither authoritarian nor democratic leadership is universally superior. Authoritarian is, I'm in charge, do your shit. Democratic leadership is, what do you guys think we should do? Okay. Personality types like to gravitate to one or the other, but I say they're both good leadership methods. I learned that they're not universally superior. Neither is universally superior. Okay? The mission, conditions, and urgency determine which is appropriate in any given moment. And this is the same for techniques. Okay? But just like, you know, if we always train for the tacticum this way, we get really good at naname right, naname left. Okay? But if it's coming from this angle, can I still go naname inside, naname outside with either leg? Can I move forward naname, rear naname, either side. If not, then somebody that not just picks me out of a crowd, but knows me and is targeting me, knows exactly how to box me in. See, just like people assume the attack is going to come from here, they assume that the attack is always going to come from a stranger who's a tough guy and not somebody that fucking knows them and knows their strengths and weaknesses. This isn't to make anybody paranoid. This is to expose blind spots. The more predictable we are, the more certain he is. And anybody that's ever fucked you over, screwed you over if you don't like the other word, right? Did so because they knew exactly how to do it. Not because they came up with a plan, but because the plan was based on what they knew about you. Been there myself. Okay? Now, this doesn't mean to be unpredictable ad hoc. But we're much more easily controlled when we don't know how things work. And we're really fucking easy to control when we don't know how we work. I think my daughter's going to cover something like that in an upcoming, the fall thing. And if she wasn't going to, she knows I want her to now. Anyway, no, we were just talking about it over the weekend. It'll be good. Okay. So expanded perception without discernment causes paralysis. But being a one-hit wonder can really get you boxed in. Okay. So the leadership stuff some other time, analogies and whatnot, but the same thing is true in the martial arts, right? Multiple perspectives can inform the decision. Okay. We can have a lot of techniques, but they can't all command the action. They can't all be the thing that's going to win because we're not set up for it. Okay. Happō expands what we can see. We can see that we could be attacked from multiple directions. We can see that we have techniques, kata in the different schools that handle different things and whatnot, right? But seeing 8 directions does not mean treating all directions as equally safe or appropriate. That's why we have to be able to move in many different directions, right? Greater awareness must eventually produce a decision. Okay? So I'm only pointing these things out. My students train through them. If you're not a student, then that's fine. You can train with whoever you want. But first, you have to decide that this is important. 2, you have to decide, or you have to be disciplined enough to make it a regular part of training with every technique, right? My students are required, once they learn Ichimonji and Seigan at a certain point, they're put in the middle of the hub, 8 spoked lines, okay? Now, go to Kamae with the attacker moving into that center space where you are, just as if you'd move away from him here and here, or here and here. Now, the attack's coming from here, or not even the attack, right? It's here, right? And so now you've got to be able to go to Ichimonji, left or right side. That's what I just did. Right side, facing the attacker's line, right? On each line from center. Okay, well, I know how I do it this way. How do I do it over there? Don't I just change legs? No. In the beginning, you can change legs. But what if that leg is injured and you can't step with that one? What if that foot's pinned down and you can't step with that one? What if you're holding something down or somebody down, multiple attackers, and you can't step with that one without letting him up? You're pinning his hand down so he can't use the weapon that's still in his hand. If you let it up, he shoots you, or he cuts your femoral artery. Okay. So again, each side creates a problem, but what I want to focus on with what I'm focusing on with this one is, can you deal with attacks that are coming in from any of those angles? Start with the basics. Okay, start with the basics, because the beginner sees things, right? They see things pretty much fixed, right? In a lot of arts, complication means you can do more and more complicated things, and you can do them faster and whatever, and that's fine. But in this system, handling more complex things, more complicated things, usually means that you need to simplify your responses. You need to narrow things down. Okay. I just recently worked on something with students where, against resistance, we're working these different techniques. We're going to do it again tomorrow night during class, but we're going to do it striking instead of grappling. And I gave them these two things, right? His waist needs to be folded, right? Butt off of the heels, and his knees need to be shifted. The alignment needs to be shifted to the side. And when you get both of those things to happen at the same time, you recognize to what degree you should be able to use one finger to apply pressure along his spine, and he'll collapse. He'll just fall over. Or even before you start touching, just move a little bit, shift the level of his arm, whatever, and try as he might, no matter how much he struggles, eventually he's just going to fall over. Now, is it about making him fall in slow motion? No, it's putting him in that position. So you have choice. You can do whatever the hell you want to him. And you can't stop it because he can't get out. That's cool shit. All right? Anyway, so think about it, right? But let's kind of wrap this up. James, any last minute questions or comments before we put this one in the can?
No, I don't see anything.
All right. Well, in that case, don't forget Wednesday. We have Whiteboard Wednesday, and I'm going to be coming at this more from a tactical thing so we can work on it on Friday. And then next week, we're going to take a look at something more closer to tactical, kind of a tactical litmus test. Okay, so we're getting a little bit. We're moving out of strategy into more of a tactical application kind of thing. But yeah, can you do your kamae in all 8 directions? Same leg moving, ending up facing back at the hub, right? Because that's where the attacker would be coming in on, right? Where you were standing, right? Same thing with rolling, same thing with leaping, same thing, right? Everybody can roll. If I face that direction, I can come out of my roll facing that direction. Can you come out of the roll, no matter which roll you did, side, back, forward, or whatever, facing the direction you came from, because that's probably where the threat's coming from. Okay. Can you steer in it so you're coming out on a different angle than you entered on? Can you change speed? Right? Where's the sticking point? When I think about doing a given skill, when I think about a given threat, what's the first thing that pops into my head, and where am I not looking? If you don't know, that's what your seniors and teachers are for. If they can't answer it, that's what their seniors and teachers are for. If they can't answer it, that's what other seniors and teachers are for. Or just ask James. James is the know-all. He needs to have like one of those turbans and stuff. He's like the Swami. No. I throw my students under the bus too. But anyway, all right. Nothing else? 0?
No, sir.
All right. In that case, I will see everyone hopefully next time on KUDEN. Thanks, James.